And breaking news overnight, Iranian missile strikes killing at least 8 people in Israel and injuring dozens more in central Israel overnight. Also destroying several buildings. Those numbers could fluctuate as search and rescue teams are looking for more victims this morning. But the fighting, no signs of slowing down. Sirens rung out in Israel overnight as the military said that a missile was launched now from Yemen. The Israeli Air Force says it hit command centers belonging to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Core Quds Force. U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee says the U.S. Embassy in Israel and consulate will remain closed today. A shelter-in-place order is still in effect. Huckabee says there was some minor damage to the property, but no staffers were hurt there. Fox News' Brett Baer asking Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu if a regime change is part of Israel's strategy in attacking Iran. Watch.
Could certainly be the result because the Iran regime is very weak. I think it's basically left with two things. It's plans to have atomic bombs and ballistic missiles. That's basically what Iran has. We decided to act because we saw enough uranium, enriched uranium, for 9 bombs. And all they had to do was weaponize them.
I spoke with the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, yesterday, who said a similar narrative about the status of the Iranian regime. Watch. Do you believe that this Iranian regime can be toppled?
Last time we spoke, I mentioned that the regime is at its weakest. As of last 3 days, the regime is 10 times weaker than it was 2 weeks ago. So at this stage, I think the Iranian people obviously realize that the playing field has been more equalized for them to give them finally an opportunity to rise and get rid of this regime. Because we always believe that the ultimate solution to the problem is for this regime to no longer be there. Not at the hand of foreign troops or countries, but at the hand of the Iranian people themselves. The Iranian people are the boots on the ground that we need. What they need, however, is solidarity from the free world to once and for all get rid of the problem.
President Trump remaining optimistic that Iran will agree not to build nuclear ambitions. Watch.
Well, I hope there's going to be a deal. I think it's time for a deal, and we'll see what happens. But sometimes they have to fight it out, but we're going to see what happens. I think there's a good chance there'll be a deal.
Joining me now is former CIA station chief and Fox News contributor Daniel Hoffman. Daniel, good to see you. What's your reaction to all of this?
You too. Well, I think one thing that's important to remember here is that Israel has really decimated Iran's means of retaliation. Remember that Hamas and Hezbollah are spent forces, and they're unable to be Iran's proxy terrorists or deliver the same sort of response as they would have before Israel took the fight to Hamas and Hezbollah after October 7. Israel also destroyed Iran's air defenses a year ago, April, and they own the skies, and they've been destroying Iran's ballistic missile capability. I'm not going to minimize the damage that Iran has caused in Israel or the civilian deaths, but it could be a lot worse if Israel hadn't so effectively taken the fight to Iran with an extraordinary level of coordination between their intelligence services and kinetic military operations.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, I know that Israel is saying that it has really diminished or set Iran back in terms of its nuclear ambitions. But what about this very important Fordow nuclear site underneath the ground, built in the mountainside?
Right. There's 3 ways to get at Iran's nuclear program. Certainly one is to destroy it, and Fordow is built deep underground. Israel doesn't have the capability from the air to do that. It's certainly not impossible for us to imagine that they could use covert operatives on the ground to do it, but so far we haven't heard any details about any sort of an operation like that. The second way to deal with the nuclear program is to negotiate a way out. That's what President Trump has offered. And the third is some sort of regime change where Israel has specifically targeted Iran's military leadership and their nuclear scientists and spared Iran's civilian leadership with an eye towards possibly encouraging Iran's civilian leaders to usurp power from the military. But we're not going to get to Fordow with Israel acting alone in all likelihood, and that's going to be the concern going forward.
Yeah, and also the danger around getting to that with all that enriched uranium, Dan. What do you think about that? I wonder if, in fact, the U.S. is looking at a bigger participation here. Do you expect the U.S. to get more involved?
Well, I think the United States has plans for every sort of contingency, and by all accounts, I don't think the United States wants to become involved unless Iran strikes us directly. In that case, all bets are off, and I think the United States responds with great force. But thus far, I think we're going to be holding our fire.
A lot of uncertainty regarding that point. Dan, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you, sir. Daniel Hoffman with Reaction. Well, today marks exactly 10 years since President Trump's infamous trip down the Golden Escalator at Trump Tower on June 16, 2015, where he announced his intention to run for the country's highest office. Joining me now is Fox News contributor, former senior counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Wow, it's been a decade. You were a huge part of his campaign and leading that campaign in the first administration. What do you think is the biggest change that has happened over this last decade, Kellyanne?
It's such a great question. I wouldn't know even where to begin, but I'd say the biggest change is that America First policies mean that we put American citizens, American industry, American workers, American sovereignty, security, above everything else. That doesn't mean America alone, but I think even as the president heads to G7 on this historic 10-year anniversary, we see what a change America's standing in the world is. Maria, look what's happening in Iran. It's Donald Trump who had that maximum pressure campaign that was working. Iran was starving to do deals when he was in his first term. Biden and Harris get in there. Within 2 weeks, they delist the Houthis as terrorists, and they stockpile all this cash to go do the October 7th massacres. So I think on the world stage, it's that other countries that were taking advantage of us, whether it's through their NATO dues and defense spending, whether it's through trade imbalances, whether it's through the fact that our military still has a huge presence in their countries. America is back and clearly a world superpower. I think domestically, it's that this president has stood in the breach. What did he say 10 years ago, Maria? He said to international derision and rejection at the time, we need border security and illegal immigrants out. Maria, what I'm most struck by in these first 5 months of his presidency in the second term and his 10-year arc of leadership is that in these first 5 months, about 1.3 million American workers have re-entered the workforce. Under Biden, it was about 1.2 million foreign-born workers. And guess what's happened, Maria?
Wow.
The wages have been raised. To attract more Americans to the workforce, these employers have had to raise the wages. One last thing President Trump has affected. I call it the democratization of information. Because he has cut out the middleman and really rendered the mainstream media all but meaningless and useless and helpless, he communicates with us directly. He has set up this expectation among we the people that the government is more transparent and truthful. It's a government that tells us at every turn what a president of the United States is thinking. Each of us receives an instant free of charge communication from the free world's leader and our commander-in-chief. This is remarkable. I think that is one of the biggest changes possible, is how forward-facing he is, how much he uses technology and instant communication with all of us.
Yeah, it's all right and spot on in terms of what has happened in the last decade. And he broke such a logjam in Washington of elites basically telling us the way to do things and the narrative by just putting the people first, America first, and pushing the idea that we are going to have private enterprise running this economy and not government. You mentioned Israel, a survey conducted by the Ronald Reagan Institute done 2 weeks before Israel struck Iran's nuclear facilities revealed nearly half of Americans back Israeli airstrikes on Iran. If negotiations between the U.S. and Tehran failed, the poll also showed a partisan divide between Republicans and Democrats. 6 in 10 Republicans said that they support airstrikes, but just 32% of Democrats said the same, Kellyanne. You have to look at this strike and these strikes from Israel as not just taming a terrible bad actor in Iran, but helping the world in terms of removing that threat that Iran is to the world, not just the United States and Israel.
That's right. To all freedom-loving people everywhere. Maria, again, the maximum pressure campaign from Trump 1 was remarkable. It worked. We starved Iran of resources. We kept them from becoming a nuclear-capable country, which is really the whole ball game here. I think the most remarkable game of telephone from this weekend was Putin calling President Trump to wish him happy birthday and getting the earful that then Putin passed on to the Supreme Leader and said to Iran, as Putin evacuated his own Russian embassy there in Tehran, saying, hey, you better get your act together. You better move toward negotiations a little bit more quickly. That's not a threat from President Trump. I think President Trump has played this perfectly. He basically has allowed Israel to defend itself, what it wishes to do, and it's been doing it masterfully and surgically, not just over the last 4 days, Maria, but for a while now, through intelligence, through military. They've been dismantling the Iran nuclear capability. But I think President Trump has left open the door to assist Iran, and if Iran touches a hair on the head of any American, President Trump has made very clear that it's the likes of what they've never seen. He said that to Kim Jong-un. I was in the room in Bedminster in July of 2017 when he said that, when he was asked about Kim Jong-un and his nuclear capabilities, and the media, oh my God, one of the dopes there even wrote a book called that, the likes of which they'll never see. But the president is serious. But what did he do? He tries to broker the peace everywhere he can. And if I was Putin, I would listen to President Trump talk about Iran and Israel, Iran needing to negotiate quickly, and I would do the same with Ukraine.
Well, by the way, he also made a veiled, not threat, but a veiled comment about it at the Army parade on Sunday. Saturday night, rather, by, talking about how strong our troops are, but also saying if you mess with our troops, they will come for you and they will take you down. I mean, he didn't get into, the threat of Iran hitting our troops, but he made the point clear. I want to get your take on what the Democrats are saying throughout this whole time. I spoke with Senator Ted Cruz yesterday, and he had an interesting take on funding Iran. Watch this.
Iran would not be in this position if Joe Biden and the Democrats had not spent 4 years flooding over $100 billion into Iran. In a very real sense, Joe Biden and the Democrats funded Iran's terrorism efforts and funded their nuclear efforts. And number two, I stand unequivocally with President Trump. President Trump has said Iran will not get a nuclear weapon, and we will do whatever is necessary. And that means we stand unequivocally with the state of Israel. That is where America is. It is where I am. And it's the right place to be for the interest of the United States of America.
I mean, not only don't they have solutions to any of the issues important to the American people, but they don't know where to go. And they've actually given President Trump an even bigger problem to fix with this funding of the Iranians. And add Barack Obama to that list, Kellyanne.
Oh, that's right. Look, a lot of folks I talked to, and a lot of folks I talked to from the Middle East say the whole play for the Muslim Brotherhood and putting us into the JCPOA nonsense, just trying to mollify our enemies, frankly, and not stopping them from being nuclear capable. Maria, 12 years now of Obama-Biden has really set us back in this regard. And let me just put Kamala Harris into the mix. We have to hear about the first female vice president. Okay. And then her administration went and funded the Houthis and Hamas, who then raped and murdered women, broke their pelvises, put babies in ovens. And I don't want anybody to forget it, Maria. Then we see the anti-Semitism, which basically is also, I'm sure, we're going to see some pro-Iranian flags. The same idiots burning American flags and waving Mexican flags and roiling our campuses with raw rank anti-Semitism. They're about a minute away from waving Iranian flags, I'm sure. They're just fools. And why is this important? Because it's not just on our college campuses with a bunch of 19-year-olds who probably don't know any better. It's in our halls of Congress. 31 Democrats, I know your names, 31 Democrats voted against a resolution on October 18th, 2023, 11 short days after the October 7 massacre. They voted against a resolution to condemn Hamas and Houthis as terrorists. So Ted Cruz is right. And one last thing, I think the reason that so many Republicans support these these airstrikes, even before they happen, Maria, is because of something that President Trump has done in the last decade also. He has transformed the Republican Party and the conservative movement into the party of the worker. And folks know you want the wars over there, not here. You don't want our young men to go over there fighting for other regimes.
Yeah.
We want, and what President Trump has done is he's transformed this. The Obama coalition from 2012 is Trump country 2024. That migration of working Americans of all races, of both genders, of all age groups, that showed up in the polls on Election Day, but it continues in this blueprint for governing. And if we think that American workers don't care about what's happening abroad, they very much care about it. Because they know it affects our sovereignty, our security, our everyday affordability.
Kellyanne, real quick before you go, because you're so smart on strategy, did you hear what AOC said about Andrew Cuomo? We only have a couple of seconds here. But she's angry that Cuomo is likely going to win the New York mayoral contest and use that as a stepping stone to run for president. Your reaction?
Yeah, I think AOC now stands for angry on cue. I think she's probably just jealous because she wants to be president of the United States herself because she's famous for being famous. I looked this up recently, and my team looked this up for me, Maria. I don't think she's passed a single bill of note. I think she renamed a couple of post offices. Who doesn't? So she actually has very little to show for her following her meteoric rise. As Nancy Pelosi said, a glass of water could have won. But I think she's jealous, and she wants the Democratic Party to go young. The young went for Trump. So she's kind of an ageist now. She uses Bernie Sanders on those private planes to give her a little bit of backing. But she's upset her party's not socialist. She's upset that you may have a reasonable, moderate Democratic mayor of New York City. If Andrew Cuomo's smart, if he wins, he'll work with President Trump. Somewhat the way Muriel Bowser here in Washington, D.C. is. You got to work with this president to reform these cities. He's willing to do it. So I hope that New York elects a mayor who's willing to do that with him.
Kellyanne, good to see you.
Angry on cue, AOC. Good to see you.
Kellyanne Conway, thank you. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Retaliatory Iranian rocket fire damaged the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv. The facility will be closed for the day. No staffers were hurt, but elsewhere in Israel, 8 people reported dead because of airstrikes, with at least 74 others hurt. IDF troops now searching through the rubble for survivors. The attack coming just hours after Israel targeted more of Iran's nuclear facilities and command centers for the Revolutionary Guard. All of this as President Trump is in Alberta, Canada this morning for the G7 summit, where the Israel-Iran conflict is expected to be high on the agenda. Joining me now is Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Congressman, thanks very much for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me, Maria.
Your reaction to what's taken place this weekend. We are now in day 4 of this fire between Israel and Iran.
Yeah, like this is the culmination of kind of a bit of an inevitable outcome. We've seen the Israelis preparing for this potentiality for quite a long time. Anyone looking at the situation in the Middle East since October 7th and since all of the operations that have taken place against groups like Hezbollah and Iranian militias and the Houthis, we all know if you're going to hit Iran, this is the time to do it. And, you know, the American position and President Trump's position has been, let's at least try every other option first. Let's have them come to the table. Let's talk diplomacy. Let's have these nuclear talks and see if it gets anywhere. And of course it didn't, because the Iranians are highly irrational in this regard, or they might falsely believe that they think they can get a lot more than they actually can, and that they're, you know, as President Trump would put it, that they hold more cards than they do. Yeah. And so, of course, it ended up this way, where the Iranians backed away from the deal, and we see the Israelis strike their nuclear facilities, nuclear scientists, and leadership. And I believe their stated goal is regime change. So they're targeting every element of the IRGC leadership, as well as even Khomeini himself. And what we have to be on the lookout for is what the plan might be if all of those guys are gone or fleeing, which is an outcome that is very, very much a real outcome, and that possibility.
So they could actually just get up and leave. I mean, obviously, Israel has already crippled Iran and its capability to make more weapons. So far, I spoke with your colleague yesterday, California Congressman and Vice Chairman of Foreign Affairs in the House, Darrell Issa. Here's what he said. Watch.
fissile material, all this years of running centrifuges and so on, they still have that material deep underground. What they lack now, thanks to the Israeli Defense Forces, they lack the ability to launch a bomb. They lack the ability to make additional materials. And quite frankly, they lack the ability to defend themselves as Israel continues to diminish their ability to make the other types of rockets, the ones that you've seen hitting Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and the like.
Congressman, from your standpoint, and of course, given your background on the Intelligence Committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee, who do you think in the world today is supporting Iran and the regime?
Well, well, who knows? I mean, there's a lot of protesters on our own streets that like to wave whatever flag is popular for the day. So, I joke when I say that, but it could be true any second, right? They like to wave Hamas's flag. Who says they won't wave Iran's flag? Other than that, it's it's your typical list of outliers on the global stage, right? It's Russia, China, et cetera, all of this sort of axis that is developed against the United States. But of course, they're going to have to back off in this regard, and they are. Russia should be especially worried since its entire war in Ukraine is based upon gaining those weapons that are developed and produced in Iran and China back into its war. So. The Israelis are doing everybody a favor in a pretty big way. And I always have to remind people, when we were talking about getting sucked into the war between Iran and Israel, I'd like to make a point there. The great Satan that the Iranians refer to is not Israel. It's the United States. It was after the Iranian Revolution. They're mad at us, not the Israelis. I mean, they don't like Jews, of course, but they're mad at us more than anything. And what people have to understand is like it has not been the United States standing in the way between Iran and Israel. It has always been Israel standing in the way between Iran and the United States. And so this is why President Trump backs, at least verbally, he's been backing Netanyahu so fervently, making sure that our air defenses are coupled with their air defenses to make sure that Iranian missiles are not heading where they need to be. I would also say the job is not done yet. They still do have certain nuclear facilities that are buried so deep underground that it requires special kinds of explosives or sabotage to destroy them. We're not done yet. They're obviously still launching missiles, so we haven't gotten all of the missile sites yet. Not we, the Israelis. So the Israelis know this, and there's going to be wave after wave. This is not a mission that was intended to last just a few days. I think they intended to last longer until the job is done.
Congressman, I want to get your take on the other areas of President Trump's agenda. Nearly 1 million illegal immigrants have already self-deported under President Trump's agenda, and it's affecting wages. The Washington Post is reporting 1 million foreign-born workers have exited the workforce since March, framing this as a sign of the weakening labor supply. But the fact is average hourly wages have gone up 0.4% over the last month. So it's really American citizens who've been gaining from this. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, we need workers, right? But that's never been a good excuse for illegal immigration. It's a good excuse for improving our visa system and getting more visas into places like agriculture and construction. And I know the president made some comments on this recently that, hey, he's been listening. We hear you. We do need more visas on this regard. But that's never been an excuse for keeping illegals here. This should not be two difficult ideas to hold in your head at the same time.
Yeah.
And you look at the numbers of deportations. I was looking at them recently, and you look at President Bush's numbers. In the millions. President Obama was, of course, nobody's broken his record. Biden was at a low, but even in the first Trump administration, I think it was around 1 million, from what I understand. So I mean, look, President Trump's got to play catch up, if anything.
Yeah, that's such
really
a great
does.
point. And when you hear all of these other former presidents speak, they sound exactly the way President Trump is speaking. I mean, they all admitted the issue and wanted to fix it. But Congressman, I want to thank you for being such a patriot, and I want to thank you for your service to our great nation, being a Navy SEAL yourself. You joined the president during Saturday's military parade, celebrating 250 years of the U.S. Army. You sang happy birthday to the president with your daughter. How was that? Tell us about it.
It was great, you know, and it was great. It's the 250th anniversary, right? It's a big number. So I was glad the president wanted to do something for the Army's birthday. I hope he's thinking along the same lines for the Navy's birthday. I think we'll outshine the Army quite a bit. I mean, you know, this was a good parade. But with the Navy, look, you've got Blue Angels, you've got Navy SEALs, you had fast roping onto aircraft carriers. There's so much cool stuff you can do in the Navy. That would be a really good show. And because keep in mind, it's also the 250th anniversary of the Navy coming up in October. And of course, next year, 2026, you've got the 250th anniversary of July 4th. So this is really just a warm up. It was cool to see, but it was also sad to see the left's reaction. It's No King's Day. You can't celebrate the Army on its 250th anniversary. If it was some random year, I guess you know, maybe it'd be slightly inappropriate, but it's the 250th anniversary. Everybody calm down, have fun. There was a ton of people there. That was another left-wing lie.
Yeah.
Right? They were focused on bleachers that were right next to where we were sitting.
I love the way the president handled it, because, Congressman, he put out a tweet. He writes, "A huge thank you to all the No Kings protesters yesterday. I was very concerned a king was trying to take my place. But thanks to your tireless efforts, I am still your president." Great job, all. President had fun with that. Congressman, it's a pleasure to see you, and we so appreciate your time this morning. Thank you, sir.
Listen to this one. A remote patch of land in Florida's Everglades may soon become the state's largest immigration detention facility. Dana Marie McNichol joins me now. Dana Marie, what can you tell me about what they're calling Alligator Alcatraz?
Hey, Stuart. Well, the Florida Attorney General is announcing a brand new proposal to help ease the pressure on crowded county jails that right now are being used to hold detained illegal immigrants. So are on an unused large piece of land. AG James Upmeyer says the potential site would serve as a 3-in-1 immigration enforcement facility. It would house detainees, process legal cases, and serve as a deportation hub. The proposed integrated federal and state approach includes the construction of temporary structures and 1,000 beds, making it the state's largest detention facility.
This remote area is surrounded by the Everglades, but is not part of the Everglades National Park. It was chosen because it already has an airstrip. The proposal includes flying people directly out from here for deportation.
Now, the 30-square-mile property in question is owned by Miami-Dade County. It has been used for military and law enforcement training in the past, so Upmeyer says officials are familiar with the area, as the Florida National Guard will play a key role in operation. They have offered military attorneys to be trained as immigration judges to expedite the legal process. The proposal is designed to detain and hold people for weeks or even months during the immigration process, and Upmeyer says this can be a low-cost site due to the natural terrain surrounding it.
If somebody were to get out, there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Only the alligators and pythons are waiting. That's why I like to call it Alligator Alcatraz.
And he goes on to say that the proposal is still in the beginning stages, as communications with local, state, and federal partners are in the works. Now, if it does get that green light, they say operation could get going between 30 to 60 days. Stuart?
Oh, that will be fast. Donna Marie, thank you very much indeed.
Oh, we heard it for months. President Trump's sweeping tariffs would fuel inflation, create price surges, hammer consumers, hardworking Americans. Well, look at the numbers. The consumer price index, the producer price index, all down, core inflation hitting post-COVID lockdown lows. The bottom line in all of this, the reinflation scare just has not happened. Meanwhile, it's Fed week, that's the Federal Reserve, with inflation tame, the job market steady, but not so hot. all the data points to an interest rate cut tomorrow. But Wall Street, no one is holding their breath because Jay Powell is clearly a political animal. And watching him cut rates so dramatically right ahead of the election last year when inflation was much hotter. I digress. What is good news is inflation expectations have come down because, anticipating inflation creates inflation. It begets inflation. And you saw it in the New York Fed survey, 1-3 5-year inflation expectations were lower. And then the University of Michigan survey last week, the 1-year inflation expectation was down sharply as well.
Yeah, I mean, the expectations were just wrong. And I think a lot of us knew that coming in, but we were told that we were wrong. So when we were saying that, hey, I don't think it's going to have the impact that you think it's going to have. And what we've seen is, one is the economists that have said this, Dagan, are still going to be able to say, hey, it's going to take more time for this to work in through the system. Supply chains are very complex. Inventories might have been stacked up, and they were able to deal with that. The sophistication of supply chains enabled some absorbing of costs that were then not passed on to consumers. So maybe we didn't feel all of that. By the way, those are, in my opinion, largely going to be seen as excuses. Now, what I do think we need to be watching for is going to be the earnings coming up. Because the first wave of earnings, everyone said, well, it was too soon. Right. Most of what we were seeing is a reflection of the quarter before Liberation Day. And earnings were really good, especially in what I pay most attention to, which is tech and AI. The other thing is AI is incredibly deflationary. So you're seeing companies slow hiring. You're seeing companies being able to expand their OPEX and their margins. All the while, they're not necessarily having to pass on all these costs to the consumers, and they're getting more efficient. I think this quarter, if there is any lagging inflation, you might see it in little parts. We're going to see it maybe in, for instance, consumer electronics, where you had large dependencies on China, and now you've got these goods coming. But we also have seen all the diversion. There was a lot of really smart diversion, great supply chain leaders of our tech companies here in the United States that found ways to get things through Mexico, through India. We've seen President Trump dealing with Tim Cook on this very issue. But in the end, we've built the sophistication in our supply chains. We know how to move things, and we know how to keep prices to our consumers at a reasonable level. Inflation is good. And to your point, I think Fed Chair Powell, we are at a point we need to lower rates. I think it would really fuel growth. I think we'd get more growth.
And I think part of the president's plan was never to get all of the pie, but to push for some of the pie. He makes it look like he wants everything to really light a fire under the CEOs to get it done. And even just some of the changes that you're talking about were good enough for him because it takes us away from exactly the kind of dependence where we were. Something is better than nothing. And ultimately, I don't think he was ever looking to shock the economy or create an inflation rate like Joe Biden did and do that to consumers. He knew the whole time that he was going to dial it back. He was going to get some of his pie and move on. So I think that goes back to the conversation we were just having, Brian, also that, that's the confidence the markets have in him also.
You got me distracted by pie.
Sorry.
I'm not going to lie. When you say pie, at this time of day, I get very hungry. I think there's a huge cost to, this is probably borrowing a Dagan point, but I think there's a huge cost to the Fed not moving on interest rates downward. I mean, there's the obvious cost of what it means for businesses when rates are high, what it means for consumers when rates are high, housing market. But the stinking debt this country has and the amount it's paying based on where rates are right now, the inflation data tells me, and more importantly, actually, and this is Brian Westbury, and I love his stuff on money supply, the M2 money supply data tells me we should be cutting rates because that's your like cash, checkable deposits, savings accounts, okay? Grew at 6% a year up until COVID. It's growing at, and we had no inflation, right? It's growing at 3.9% right now. So it's not growing at all relative to where it was, which tells me that's the base level driver of inflation. It's low. I think it's time to cut rates, both for what it means for the consumers, but also what it means more broadly for the cost of borrowing, which falls on taxpayers.
So President Trump, when he was getting ready to sign the 3 Congressional Review Act resolutions to undo the electric vehicle mandates out in California, what a fantastic moment it was. And he had this stream of consciousness discussion in the White House, in the East Room. And one thing, I think it was in this moment, that he hit, but this is the brilliance of President Trump. And he went, and you know, they need to, I think this was when he said this. And you know what? They need to cut interest rates. The Federal Reserve needs to cut interest rates because given the amount of debt that we have, one single percentage point would be $300 billion in savings every year. And these ideas are in his brain and they come out. And he said, I stay up at night thinking about this. This is what keeps me up at night, instead of Joe Biden sleeping on a beach. And then he goes, and who sleeps in public anyway?
There is guilty on occasion, I'm not going to lie.
Pro-growth story to all of this as well as a lack of inflationary story. Very, very volatile, but the Atlanta Fed's GDP as of today, 3.5%. Next update comes out tomorrow. But the component of retail sales, the core group that goes into the real PCE calculation in the GDP report, rose 0.4%. One analyst now estimates that this puts consumer spending on track to increase by 3% in real terms in the second quarter. So we're not guaranteed to be looking at two back-to-back quarters of negative GDP growth that everyone assumed that we were going to, which in theory, the economist would say defines that recession.
Yeah.
If you actually see positive growth in the second quarter, that wipes out, I think, a lot of the concerns that even if there is a little bit of inflation, how much can we grow our way out of it? And the productivity gains that you've talked about totally helps that.
I think that the one big, beautiful bill is going to be a big focus on its potential impact on inflation. But I think we actually have inflation pretty tamed right now. And I think that it is time for the Fed to act as a business owner in that, sitting in that chair for a minute. That would give me more confidence to invest, to hire, to expand. And I think they need to think about that. They need to think about how we are getting the middle of the market to move, not just the biggest companies with the largest operating leverage.
Somebody asked about the spike in oil. Isn't that inflationary? Not a spike that's related to a potential supply shock. In fact, it would hurt growth, not fuel inflation. That would be my take.
Welcome back. Well, the fighting between Israel and Iran ramped up overnight on this day 5 of the conflict. Hundreds of thousands have hunkered down in Tel Aviv bomb shelters as more are evacuating out of Tehran. Israeli media reporting that the IDF is attacking western Iran this morning. On the heels of President Trump returning from the G7 meeting in Canada early, he left early to get back to D.C., and here's what he said from Air Force One. Watch.
They're better than ceasefire. We're not looking for a ceasefire. I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're looking for better than a ceasefire.
Emmanuel Macron had initially said that the president left so that he could oversee a ceasefire. The president said that's wrong. President Trump previously warned on Truth Social last night Iran should have signed the deal. I told them to sign. Simply stated, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I said it over and over again. Everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran. Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst. He is chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane, back with me. General, good to see you. Your reaction to what we know so far?
Well, certainly where the president is, he's supporting Israel 100% to complete the campaign that they started here. And that campaign focuses on Iran's center of gravity, their nuclear enterprise. And they want to destroy that enterprise as much as they possibly can, decapitate the leadership, and they're doing a remarkable job in doing that, and also eliminate their ballistic missiles, which is their major weapon that they're using against the Israelis. And they're making significant progress in all three of these areas, as you have noted on this show. And the president is behind that 100%. I think what is in the offing here is Israel knows full well, even though they have significant imagination and significant covert capability, they know that there's a couple of deeply buried sites that they're very challenging for them to get to with air power. And I'm assuming they would like the United States to assist them in achieving that end state. After all, the president did say he's not going to permit Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And if we walk away and leave those sites intact, then the Ayatollah will be able to achieve what he's always wanted here. The reason why he never voluntarily dismantled the program through negotiations is because he was willing to accept the airstrike, believing that he could still recover some aspect of his nuclear enterprise after the airstrikes are completed, and he would be able to rebuild that nuclear program. That is where his head is, and we've got to stop that from happening, in my judgment. Assist the Israelis in their air campaign by conducting a limited but focused air campaign on using penetration bombing to eliminate the end of that nuclear end state. And that will be a major strategic achievement. That takes off the table. Think of what it does. Takes off the table the thought of a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. It reduces Iran's as a major power broker in the region. Yeah. And for the congressman to say that we've never been at war with Iran, formally, yeah, but they killed 241 Marines in the 80s. They blew up 2 of our embassies in Lebanon and Kuwait and killed hundreds more. They killed scores of our Air Force personnel in the barracks in Saudi Arabia in the 90s, and it's a documented fact that they developed advanced IEDs to focus on U.S. soldiers in the war in Iraq. Lloyd Austin, the last general we had there, estimated they killed 2,000 of us there. So this has been going on for 45 years, and we have an opportunity to take them off the table here. Well, and I think that is the right thing to do.
And thank you for that, because I also should have reminded Congressman Warren Davidson, who was just with us, all of the times that Iran has been chanting death to America, which, of course, we know. But let me get back to what you're talking about in terms of these nuclear sites, which is so important. You've said that the nuclear enterprise was spread over 12-plus sites, and you're talking about this significant one, Fordow, underground, built in the mountainside. What's the danger of upsetting that, blowing that up, and what would it require in terms of the U.S.'s participation in helping Israel get to that site?
Well, we have deep penetration bombs that can reach that site, and likely it forces a collapse on itself. By that I mean, we have bombs. That site is a half-mile down with 2 to 3 feet walls, and that's pretty significant in terms of a target. But our deep penetration bombs can achieve that end. So yes, we do have the capability, and there may be some other sites that may not be as deeply buried as that, but something that Israel has struggled to complete the destruction of, that we would assist in doing it. So that's very achievable. And we're not even conducting an air campaign here. This would be a limited but focused airstrikes, maybe a couple of days involved in it, to complete the destruction. And we're very familiar with this. We've had this on our target list for years. So our people, our intelligence people, and our air power people know exactly what they're doing if the president makes the decision, to do that. And let me mention something that may be in the back of other people's minds and the back of the congressman's mind, too. This is not Iraq or Afghanistan, where we went in with a ground invasion with the purpose of conducting regime change, and we wound up also doing nation building. There's no plans whatsoever for the United States or Israel to conduct a ground invasion. There's no plans for us to physically conduct a regime change. If a regime change comes internally, it'll be Iran's choice, not Israel's, and not the United States. So we got to understand what we are really dealing with here. And will that lead to a war? Don't think so. Iran's conventional military is very weak, and they know if they attack us decisively that our response will be overwhelming. It would be against their military targets, their economic energy targets, and their political targets. And that would likely result, inevitably, in an internal regime change taken as a result of the regime likely being destroyed in its capability to have influence over the people. Yeah, the Iranian leadership understands this.
It's a really important point to make, as some Democrats in Congress are trying to reiterate what you just heard from Warren Davidson, as we're, quote unquote, we're not at war with Iran, when in fact, of course, Israel stopping Iran from having a nuclear weapon is a U.S. core national interest. You've also got Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not ruling out assassinating Iran's supreme leader. When asked about taking that action, he said it's not going to escalate the conflict, it's going to end the conflict. But there was some speculation before that President Trump reportedly vetoed an Israeli plan to assassinate the Ayatollah. General, I mean, is that the only way to get regime change here?
No, I think the regime gets so weakened and its security forces so ineffective. Look at the penetration that's taken place of Iran's security forces. The fact that we are decapitating their military leadership, much as we did with Hezbollah, is because we have people in Iran who are providing that information to the Israelis. And that is why they've been so successful at covert operations for a number of years, destroying drone plants, destroying weapons factories, killing nuclear scientists, taking out the political leader of Hamas, who was in the VIP section of Tehran, the capital city, where all the other significant leaders live, and penetrated exactly where that person was living. When they're killing these people, they're killing them in their apartments and in their homes or in their offices. They have exquisite intelligence. They can't achieve that end without having the security forces providing them some information. There's significant penetration taking place here, which certainly weakens the regime and the grip it has on its people. I don't want to go too far with that and be Pollyannish about it. I mean, these are killers and thugs, and if the people got in the streets tomorrow, they'd start shooting them, for sure. But as this regime gets weaker, as a result of the campaign that's constructed against them, it makes them certainly more vulnerable to the people rising up and to leaders around them. There's severe criticism of the regime right now by insiders. Sure. They're stunned by the decapitation of the leaders that have taken place. They're severely criticizing the civilian leadership of the fact that all the air defense systems are down and Israel is flying. Can you imagine what it's like to be in Iran today and be a leader? And you hear all of those fighter jets flying over every single day, day and night.
Unbelievable.
And those are Israeli fighter jets. That is absolutely the psychological and emotional impact of something like that is quite extraordinary. And the people are frustrated by this because the leaders brought this on them. And 80% of the people in Iran, are opposed to the leadership. They know they're thugs and killers, and they've been repressing them for 45 years.
Well, the air superiority that Israel has been able to take in Iran is incredible. Real quick, General, how much longer do you think this goes on? And do you think the next step or upcoming steps will be the U.S.'s help with those penetration bombs to get to the nuclear sites underground?
Well, that's the president's decision. My thought is I think he should do it for all the obvious reasons we just stated.
Okay.
I think we're about halfway through maybe the target set that Israel has. In terms of the Iranians, what they've been done, there's been 10 waves of ballistic missiles in the first 24 hours, 200. On the 15th, that was the 14th, on the 15th, 105.
Wow.
Yesterday, 24-hour period, 65, so it's going down. And also the casualties are going down, so that's good news.
Yes.
And so a lot of the launches are being destroyed, and the ballistic missile stockpiles are also being destroyed.
Incredible.
So eventually, that's going to come down to something that's very negligible. As Israel continues to destroy these ballistic missiles and their launch systems.
What an incredible success from the Israeli side. General, thank you so much, as always. General Jack Keane.
Yeah, great talking to you, Maria.
And to you, sir. We'll be right back. The Congressional Budget Office says President Trump's big, beautiful bill would widen deficits by nearly $3 trillion after the Senate Finance Committee released its revisions to the bill on Monday. The revisions include major tax reforms and even steeper Medicaid cuts than the House called for, plus a lowered cap on the state and local tax deduction. The SALT comes back down to $10,000 in the Senate. That's down from the House's $40,000 cap version. Some blue state House Republicans pushing back on the revision. New York Congressman Mike Lawler called the Senate proposal dead on arrival when it gets back to the House, warning that he would vote no if the SALT cap remains at $10,000. Joining me now is the man himself. New York Congressman Mike Lawler is here, a member of the Financial Services Committee in the House. Congressman, it's great to see you.
Thanks for having me,
Are you really going to vote no on this?
Yeah. I mean, look,
You're going to blow up the president's
I've
agenda.
been very clear from the beginning that I would never vote to pass a tax bill that does not adequately lift the cap on salt. The fact is that salt Republicans in New York, California, New Jersey, we're the ones that delivered the majority for House Republicans in 22 and again in 24. And if you look at the situation, the fact is that the cap on salt expires at the end of this year. So we're willing to negotiate. We're willing to keep a cap in place, but it has to be reasonable and it has to provide real tax relief to middle class and working class families. The fact is, when people talk about, oh, we're subsidizing bad blue states, the reality over the past 7 years is that 29 states blew through the $10,000 cap. So to revert this back to $10,000 is absolutely absurd, and nobody would ever support that among us salt Republicans. We negotiated in good faith with the White House, with House leadership. We got to a $40,000 number, which will cover almost 90% of my district and districts like mine in terms of making people whole so that they can fully deduct their state and local taxes on their federal income tax return. The cap itself, the reason people took the standard deduction and the doubling of the standard deduction is precisely because one of the biggest things they would itemize is their state and local taxes, their property taxes and their state income taxes. So a lot of New Yorkers were unfairly hurt in this process. We can all agree Kathy Hochul's a disaster. We can all agree New York needs to reform its spending and tax policy. But to double tax New Yorkers or Californians is wrong. And by the way, Republicans have fought against double taxation for years, including on the estate tax.
What do you say to the Senate, who says, look, we don't have any sponsors of the salt deduction in the Senate, and by the way, it's not our problem or our fault that Kathy Hochul and the governor of New York, the governor of New Jersey, the governor of California have sky-high taxes. Cut the taxes.
Look, we agree, cut the taxes. But the fact is, when they talk about subsidies, we can get into the game of subsidies and who subsidizes who. A state like South Carolina takes more federal dollars than tax revenue it generates to the federal government, okay? So we can go through that game chapter and verse. But when I look at the totality of this, if unlimited salt, which will come back into effect if we don't pass a tax bill, is a $1.3 trillion hit to the Treasury. So we're saying, look, we'll give you $1 trillion to double the standard deduction. We'll give you $1 trillion to increase the child tax credit. We'll give you $1 trillion to pay for no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. But we're not giving you the full boat. And at the end of the day, this is a very simple game. It's 50 plus 1. You need 218 votes in the House, and you need 50 plus 1 in the Senate. And
all right, but look, I mean,
at the end of the day, that's what this boils down to.
You say, you know, if nothing is done, it's going to go back. I get that. But then it's on you that you allowed the largest tax increase on people that we've ever seen. You comfortable with that?
I have negotiated in good faith from day one. And I am still willing to work with my colleagues to get this done. But we are not going to be fleeced in New York when, in fact, it was New York Republicans and California Republicans that delivered the majority in the House. I won a seat that Kamala Harris won. So this, at the end of the day, boils down to being able to deliver for my constituents, fight for my constituents, and that's part of the process here.
Earlier in the show, I spoke with your colleague Ryan Zinke, and he said, "Look, a little salt, a little pepper. We're still in the recipe making business here. If it comes back to the House and then the Senate agrees, okay, it's not 40,000, but it's 30,000. Will you agree?"
No.
You're not going to agree even to $30,000 cap?
That's what Ways and Means.
I bet 20,000.
That's what definitely not. Ways and Means put forth 30,000, and they did so trying to jam us without negotiating. And we were able to force a negotiation in good faith with the Speaker, with the White House. We came to a $40,000 agreement. Look, I like sea salt, not that granular stuff. And so that's what we're talking about here. We need to provide real middle-class tax relief. We negotiated. Okay. That's the deal. Stick to the deal.
I want to get your take on some other things, because I don't know that you, at the end of the day, are going to be this, like, adamant about it? Because you're not going to want to blow up the president's agenda, I don't think. But, you know.
I'm not trying to blow up the president's agenda.
Well, you will if you're more than 3 no votes in the House.
I am representing my constituents and my district. And look, at the end of the day, this boils down to a simple reality, which is not passing a bill, which we all agree would be catastrophic from a tax standpoint.
Yeah.
Not passing a bill is not an option. This is an important component to the deal. And my colleagues, whether they like it or not, have to accept it.
One of your colleagues is running for governor, we think, Elise Stefanik. You still going to run for governor?
I'm looking at it. We're going through that process right now. A new poll shows that I am better positioned to win against Kathy Hochul because at the end of the day, you have a state that is 2.5 to 1 Democratic. You have to be able to appeal to independents and Democrats and Republicans. I've won 3 times in 2-to-1 Democratic districts.
So is that what this is about? Is that what this is about?
No, the SALT issue is about fighting for my district. This is something I said from the very beginning. I would never support a tax bill that did not lift the cap on SALT, and I will not break my word.
What's your take on remittances, 899, all of these other financial services issues that the Senate, I think, tried to tweak when they sent it back, but the House bill would impose this 3.5% tax on remittances sent in the United States by those who are not U.S. citizens. Some people feel that, as well as, well, 899 in particular is capturing more people than it was intended, and there are all these unintended consequences.
I think that's right. I just met with the Australian Consul General yesterday. That was an issue that was raised when you're trying to bring investment from outside into the United States. You've got to be very careful on some of this tax policy. So this is still fluid. It's still a negotiation. I think we have to be cognizant of the fact, and what the president is trying to do is, you know, right size our trade imbalance. He's trying to get foreign investment into the United States. We don't want to counter that by making certain changes that will negatively impact that.
What about the stablecoin legislation? So the Senate passed a Genius Act yesterday, 68-30 vote. We just had the CEO of Circle on, and he's talking about this being a landmark bill, establishing federal guardrails for stablecoins. The House's version, the Clarity Act, poised for a full floor vote after the House Financial Services and Agricultural Committees advanced the text last week. Where is that? And I mean, the demand for treasuries, I think, is an interesting element of that.
Yeah. So obviously, there's a little bit of difference between the two versions. Still needs to be reconciled in a way, but I think the objective is to get a actual regulatory framework in place. We need to be on the cutting edge here. We need to be leading this as we move forward, as the economy changes, the global economy changes, as digital assets become a bigger part of the global marketplace. So having a regulatory framework is critical. I think the House is going to move forward with the Clarity Act, and then the two are going to have to reconcile. But this is a tremendous step forward. I think this has been years in the making. There's been a lot of work, bipartisan work by the committee to build consensus, to actually put a regulatory framework in place. I think we will get there, most likely after reconciliation, but I think we will get there this year.
All right. You've got a lot on your plate, Congressman. When are you expecting the big, beautiful bill to come back to the House?
Well, I think the Senate is trying to stay on track with that July 4th framework that Leader Thune has laid out.
And then you get it after
we're gonna deal with it right after that.
So you'll have it on the president's desk mid-July?
I would think certainly before the August recess.
If you agree to a lower SALT cap.
Not a lower SALT cap. We're going to keep it at 40,000. The president understands how important it is.
I want to bring in right off the bat here, QI Research's CEO and Chief Strategist, Daniel DiMartino Booth. So what, I mean, there was a lot there to digest. I'm taking notes. You don't have the benefit, but what jumped out at you?
The Fed is saying that we're heading straight into stagflation. That's what they're saying. Growth is going to slow, unemployment's going to rise, inflation's going to be much hotter than it is right now. Where they're getting these ideas, I absolutely have no idea, Charles. It's as if they didn't look at the housing data that came out this morning and yesterday.
Yeah, there's a lot of data I don't think they looked at. It felt like not long ago, 4.4 was the unemployment trigger. Like that would have been the number that would have gotten Jay Powell excited. Now they're projecting 4.5%.
They're moving the goalposts.
They're moving the goalposts, and they seem to be somewhat comfortable with it. Is it because it's offset by inflation?
If that gives them comfort, Charles, we're in trouble. I mean, possibly that they can make that their justification. But in this environment with initial jobless claims pushing up to the highest in the post-pandemic era, as well as continuing jobless claims. They're clearly not making monetary policy for anything else than trying to hurt the current administration.
And of course, you know, and I hate to say it to pick up on that, but it's hard to push back on it. So September of last year, 50 basis points. A lot of people were saying that was to help Joe Biden win the election. I resisted that, right? I thought there were reasons for them to cut it, but it was a big cut, 50 basis. And then, even though CPI went up, and you know they still cut again. And now we've got conditions where unemployment is going to be higher than when they saw. If they saw a sense of urgency at 4.2%, but don't think it's going to be one now, it's tough. And I want to bring up some other charts here because you kind of talked about what we saw just this week, some of the economic data. So what stood out for me is expectations, two ways. Michigan sentiment number, index of consumer expectations up 22% month over month. So people are feeling better about the next 6 months there. On the other side of that this morning, the Empire Fed numbers, right? Same thing came in. Empire Fed itself fell off a cliff, but if you look at new orders, if you look at employment up, prices down fractionally, but they're going in the right direction. It just feels like, can they hide behind stagflation? How long can they hide behind the fear of stagflation?
I don't think they can. Look, housing is 36% of the CPI. It's coming. House prices are coming down. Apartment rents are coming down. This will feed through, and it has been feeding through into a disinflationary impulse in the CPI that the Fed is absolutely clearly ignoring. And you're looking at the manufacturing side of the state of New York. New York is the biggest services economy in the country. It is the bellwether for the majority of the U.S. economy. And we're seeing serious weakening on the services side of the New York State economy.
I'm going to bring up, I'm going to skip a chart here, folks. Let's bring up the housing starts and permits because that's out this morning. That's fresh data. You alluded to this. You know, this is the primary focus. So, again, it's not just that the starts down big, but they've been down a lot recently. Permits down. And how important is the housing market for the Federal Reserve?
Housing leads the economy into and out of recession and expansion, period. It is what drives the economy. There's so many people employed in this sector as well, and we're seeing backlogs of housing starts also come down 3 months in a row. That means that demand is not out over the horizon. We've heard the news from Lennar, 13.3% that they spent on average in the most recent quarter on incentives. Home prices are coming down. This is going to translate into fewer construction workers.
You've already mentioned that President Trump's not going to be happy with what he heard. Later on in the show, I want to ask you who might be the next Fed chair.
I've got some answers for you.
I can't. Okay, we'll talk to you in a moment with the panel.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping claims that Beijing is deeply concerned about the Israel-Iran conflict, saying that the conflict should be de-escalated as soon as possible. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that if Iran's oil exports are cut off, China may find itself in trouble. More than 90% of Iran's oil exports go to China. President Trump's 2018 sanctions on Iran caused global demand to drop. Joining me now is the Gatestone Institute senior fellow Gordon Chang to weigh in on China. Gordon, let me know how you assess this chessboard here, particularly after we know that China was sending flights, cargo flights into Iran. What is on those planes?
Yeah, we don't know, but we know this isn't good because those planes are turning off their transponders as they approach Iranian airspace. China is sending something it doesn't want the world to know. It could be ammunition, could be drones, pretty unlikely about that, but it also could be nuclear weapons. We just don't know.
Unbelievable. You have a new op-ed on how Israel just ended China's power status in the Middle East. Very interesting.
Yeah, if we go back to March 2023, it looked like China was going to drive the U.S. out of the region. That's the month where China brokered that deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Last year in July, China got 14 Palestinian factions to go to Beijing to sign what's called the Beijing Declaration, the Unity Pact. So we were sort of on the back foot. But with President Trump going to the region last month, that's really triumphal trip, and Israel targeting Iran, which is China's proxy. The Iranians don't think they're a proxy of anyone, but the Chinese think Iran is a proxy. And China's been fully supporting Iran's attack on Israel. So right now, China's policies in the Middle East are just in tatters.
Well, I mean, you might want to, someone reference, this is like Hitler losing Italy. during the 1940s. I mean, China losing Iran is a big deal.
It's an enormous deal because China thought that it could drive the U.S. out of the region, could sort of start this momentum around the world that the U.S. was in retreat everywhere. And now it's the Chinese that are having problems. Remember, they've got these proxy wars around the world. They've got Russia and Ukraine. They've got North Africa, those insurgencies that look like wars. They've got Iran and, of course, Pakistan and India last month. You know, they had that 4-day war. China was fully backing Pakistan. Now all of China's initiatives seem to be failing, and that is a real indication that Beijing is in trouble globally.
Right. And as the Israelis win or appear to be winning, it gives more strength to the United States, which is, of course, China's #1 adversary. U.S. Ambassador to China David Perdue called out China for its threat to the global supply chain. He said this: "We have all witnessed the extent to which our businesses have become overly dependent on China for components, inputs, intermediate goods, and even entire supply chains." The governor of China's central bank outlining a plan for a global financial system relying on several major currencies, not just the U.S. dollar. So they're being complicit there as well in terms of having this basket of currencies. The New York Times also said that China is flooding the globe with cheap exports. We know that. Toys, cars, shoes. All going to places like Germany, Brazil, Indonesia at a pace that's reshaping global economies, Gordon. So this is not just a global situation. It's also impacting the economy at a time that China's economy is quite weak.
Yes, and the problem for China right now is that President Trump's tariffs cut off the U.S. market for many Chinese goods. China needs to sell them elsewhere. So they are flooding other markets, and countries are now starting to resist, including the European Union, which is an enormous market for the Chinese. Xi Jinping doesn't want consumption as the basis of the Chinese economy. His only plan is to export more. The U.S. is saying not to our market. That leaves Xi Jinping with no options whatsoever.
Yeah, which is why President Trump has made it a priority in his agenda to get supply chains back to America, trying to encourage companies to get their supply chains here and not rely on communist China. But you made an interesting point before we sat down about this idea that the U.S. would get further involved and use the bomb busters to actually upset that nuclear site underground, the Fordow unit. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of the bunker busters and us doing that because, look, Israel has almost total control over the air over Iran. That means it can put in and extract its operatives, and they can destroy these facilities on the ground. The other thing, if we get involved, Maria, what I'm worried about is Iran's operatives in the U.S. will strike. Remember, September 11th, 2023, President Biden has that deal with Iran. He gives clemency to 5 Iranian operatives, and he lets 3 of them remain in the U.S. at a time when we knew that Iran was trying to kill former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and one other senior State Department official. That was just, I can't, it's indescribable what President Biden tried to do. You know, and these operatives, they can strike us, our infrastructure, all sorts of things. We now learned afterwards that they're trying to kill President Trump. So we have to be worried about the homeland, because if the Iranian operatives strike, maybe the Chinese will go in with them, and China can do a lot of damage, not only to our civilian infrastructure, but to our military bases as well.
So you think we need to understand and remember that you've got Iranian operatives in the United States right now?
Yes, along with Chinese operatives and probably Russian ones as well.
Well, I mean, thanks to the wide open border, you had 150,000 Chinese nationals come into the country.
Yeah, and I think Borders Czar Hoffman should concentrate all of his resources on breaking up those Iranian and those Chinese networks. You know, they can let others go for the meantime, but we need critically, this is the most urgent task of the federal government, is to break up these Chinese and Iranian operatives in the U.S. because their networks are extremely dangerous.
That is huge. I mean, look, Israel was so genius in the way that they did this by getting Mossad to get weapons into Iran so that they could strike from within Iran into their own country.
You know, think about this.
That's what you're saying here, but in the opposite.
Yeah, Israel had, you know, the drones that they had snuck into Iran.
Right.
And Ukraine snuck drones into Russia. But the Chinese don't have to do that because there's like 1 million Chinese drones in our country already that are registered with the FAA, and God knows how many that are not. So clearly the Chinese can do substantial damage to our country if Xi Jinping gives the get-go.
It's a great point, and I have been railing on that for years now, the fact that the U.S. military buys drones from DJI, a Chinese drone maker, which is absolutely outrageous. Now, Senators Pete Ricketts and John Fetterman are leading a bipartisan charge to codify oversight on foreign countries buying up American farmland. So there's that angle as well. I mean, look, the Chinese have come in, bought farmland near military installations. There are certain governors, like Sarah Sanders, among others, in Arkansas, who says, you're not going to buy any farmland in my state. But it's been state by state as opposed to a federal rule against it.
Yeah, and remember, we've had those 3 Chinese nationals who have been charged with smuggling in biological agents into our country. Those were probably genetically modified biological agents, and that means if Chinese-owned farmland, those agents can take those germs, those fungus and whatever, and actually start a blight in the United States. We know that blight that the nationals brought in, Chinese nationals brought in, they can go after wheat, corn, barley, maize. It causes problems in humans and livestock. This is an attack on American farms and American ranches. This is a weapon of mass destruction, and we shouldn't allow the Chinese to own land in our country because we can't own land in their country, Maria.
Right. Why would we do that? Well, I mean, look, this is also partly President Trump's genius. He doesn't want China and the Communist Party to really know how he's thinking about things. And that's good in many ways. You know, when you consider the fact that, yeah, they've come in, they've brought this pathogen, and we're still negotiating a trade deal. I don't know how we negotiate a trade deal with such a bad actor, and yet President Trump doesn't want to poke the bear too much to actually trigger World War III.
Yes, and to trigger those Chinese agents in our country as well, because we're not prepared right now. So, yeah, I can understand that he's sort of letting it go a little bit, but I really liked Ambassador Perdue's comments because he was very explicit about America starting to get a resilient supply chain. You know, in the Biden administration, you had Janet Yellen talk about friendshoring, and she was very polite about it. I'm glad that Ambassador Perdue is specific.
Oh, God, for